Daniel chapter 4. Now, if you've been with us over the last couple of months, then it probably won't surprise you to know we're in Daniel. We are looking at the story of Daniel at the moment, and we are looking at the example that Daniel and his friends give to us of what it is like to live in a place that is not our natural home. Daniel and his friends and many other people were Israelites taken from their land in Israel and Judea, and they were taken to Babylon, where they had to live amongst a people that were not their own, worshipping gods that were not their gods. And Daniel and his friends give us a really good example of what it is to be a people living in what we call exile. And we as Christians, we believe we are citizens of heaven. And we live on this earth, we live and breathe. You may have noticed we live on this earth. We live here, but we're not of here, we're of heaven. And so there are times we find in our lives where what we believe and what we stand for conflict with what's going on around us. And so we're reading through the book of Daniel as an example of that. So we're going to read Daniel 4. We're not going to read all of it. I'm going to jump through it. We think we've got it right with the screen. Me and Paul sat through it this morning. But I'm reading from the New Living Translation. So Daniel 4, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Now, the first thing you'll notice is this part of Daniel is written by King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we're not sure whether he actually wrote it. What we think actually it was that Daniel took the letter and put it in his book when Daniel wrote the book. But this is King Nebuchadnezzar writing. Peace and prosperity to you. I want you all to know about the miraculous signs and wonders the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how powerful his wonders. His kingdom will last forever, his rule through all generations. Immediately, if you've been with us, you'll notice there's a slight change of tone from King Nebuchadnezzar. Last week, he was building a big tower and saying, everyone bow down to me, otherwise I'll throw you in the fiery furnace. Something's changed here. And this chapter tells us what's changed. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in my palace in comfort and prosperity. But one night I had a dream that frightened me. I saw visions that terrified me as I lay in my bed. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, another one. This time he tells the people, he wants to interpret it, what the dream is. That's very helpful of him. He tells them, and he calls together his magicians, and he calls together Daniel, and he says, here's my dream. Please interpret it. Daniel, who is also known as Belteshazzar. So we go now to verse 10, and he tells him what his dream is. While I was lying in my bed, this is what I dreamed. I saw a large tree in the middle of the earth. The tree grew very tall and strong, reaching high into the heavens for all the world to see. It had fresh green leaves, and it was loaded with fruit for all to eat. Wild animals lived in its shade, and birds nested in its branches. All the world was fed from this tree. Then, as I lay there dreaming, I saw a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven. And the messenger shouted, cut down the tree and lop off its branches. Shake off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Chase the wild animals from its shade and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump and the roots in the ground, bound with a band of iron and bronze, and surrounded by tender grass. Now, let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the wild animals among the plants of the field. For 7 periods of time, let him have the mind of a wild animal instead of the mind of human. For this has been decreed by the messengers. It is commanded by the holy ones, so that everyone may know that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world. He gives them to anyone he chooses, even to the lowliest of people. Belteshazzar, that was the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now tell me what it means, for none of the other wise men of my kingdom can do so. But you can tell me, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. So he tells him his dream, and then he asks Daniel what it means. And Daniel takes the dream, and he listens, and he goes to God, and there's a heaviness, because he knows it's not a good dream. And he actually says to Nebuchadnezzar, I wish it would be for someone else. But this is what the meaning of the dream was. Let's jump down to 24. He tells him, first of all, just before this, that the tree represents him. The tree represents Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. And then in verse 24 he says, "This is what the dream means, your majesty, and what the Most High has declared will happen to my lord the king. You will be driven from human society. You will live in the fields of the wild animals. You will eat grass like a cow, and you will be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 periods of time will pass while you live this way, until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses. But the stump and roots of the tree were left in the ground. This means that you will receive your kingdom back again when you have learned that heaven rules. King Nebuchadnezzar, please accept my advice. Stop sinning, do what is right, break from your wicked past, and be merciful to the poor. Perhaps then you will continue to prosper." Now, it may not surprise you that King Nebuchadnezzar does not heed that warning. And 12 months later, he stood looking at his glorious city of Babylon, this kingdom that he reigns, and he says, "How great I am, how great my kingdom is." And suddenly, we read this in verse 33. "That same hour, the judgment was fulfilled, and Nebuchadnezzar was driven from human society. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven. He lived this way until his hair was as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird claws. After this time had passed, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven. My sanity returned, and I praised and worshipped the Most High and honored the one who lives forever. His rule is everlasting, and his kingdom is eternal." So, in a nutshell, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and in this dream, God shows him that he's going to cut his kingdom down. He is the greatest king in the world. There is no king at that time like him, and he just declares how great he is all the time. He built a statue to show how great he was. He declares to everyone, "Look at this amazing kingdom that I have built." And God humbles him. God humbles him. He takes everything away from him. He doesn't just take, the stuff away from him, but he takes away his very humanity. And Nebuchadnezzar lives for 7 periods of time. We're not exactly sure what that period was, but he lives for 7 periods of time. And in that time, he realizes that God is the true God and that God gave him everything. So what does this mean for us? I'm going to hazard a guess this morning that there are not many kings in this room. We've recently had a new king, haven't we? We've all had to get used to singing "God Save the King." I was struck, actually. I was telling Charles this. I don't know if you remember those Jubilee videos that we did for the Queen's Jubilee. And there was a moment where Charles said, in this video, he said, "Someone shouted to me that the king had died." Obviously, this is years ago, when the Queen came to the throne. And I just suddenly had this moment of, we have a queen. And I said, that exact same thing, but the other way, happened to me while I was driving to Sainsbury's. When I heard on the radio, the Queen's died, God save the king. I was like, we have a king? That's a side note. But I'm going to hazard a guess there's not many kings in here. And so I was praying and I said, God, what is it you want to talk to us about this morning? And I just felt him say, there were 2 questions that he asked me. And the first of these was, what are you building? What are you building? Now, most of us are building something. We may not be actual builders. I'm very much not an actual builder. I'm a Lego builder. I can build a Lego. But most of us are building something and we may not even realize it. When I was 17, it may stun you to know that I was not the coolest kid in the room. Thanks, Sarah. We need to have a conversation about... That's I wasn't the coolest kid in the room. But I did have one thing that most of the kids didn't have. That was that I learned to drive. So I was 17. I passed my test first time. And my mum had this just really tired Peugeot 309, which broke down at least twice between here and home and when I tried driving back and forth. And so I could drive. And so one day I said to some of my friends, I said, I'll pick you up and we'll drive to college. It was 1.2 miles, people. And so I get in the car in the morning and I get my tape adapter. So some people may not even remember tapes, but we had a tape in the car, but I didn't own any tapes at this point. So I had one of those tapes. Do you remember those adapters that you got, which you put in and then you could plug into your Discman? So I could drive along listening to CDs, apart from when I went over a bump. And it skipped. So I'm driving along, and it's all quite cool. And I pick up my friends, and I feel like the coolest kid in the world. And then we get to the car park. Now, the thing is, right, when I learned to drive, I didn't learn how to reverse park. Because there was at the test centre, there was no way you could do the reverse park. And how many of you know that you never pay to learn to drive? You pay to learn to pass a test, don't you? That's what you're paying the driving instructor to do. To teach you. It's not how to drive, it's how can I pass my driving test. And so I turn up in this really small, tight car park, and I have to reverse park. 15 goes later, bearing in mind it's an old Peugeot 309, there's no parking sensors or anything like that. I've gone back and forth, back and forth. My 4 friends look at me and go, we're getting out. And they just look at me, what are you doing? Just like, really, we're going to go to registration. And they walk off and just leave me with my car kind of half wedged between 2 other cars, trying to how am I going to get out of here? I eventually just drove it down the road and then asked my dad to teach me how to reverse park. But suddenly I went from feeling like the coolest kid to feeling like a complete idiot, feeling like a complete fool, I thought I was really cool. It turns out I'm not. See, I tried to build this kind of persona for myself that I was quite cool and I could be the guy that drove everyone everywhere, and it turned out that I could drive anywhere that you didn't need to park. We could just drive around in circles. But we're all building something. We're all building something. Maybe it's your image. Maybe it's what you look like. There's a lot in the world at the moment about people trying to build online personas of how they look. Their Instagram profiles, Facebook profiles. What do I look like to people outside? You know, their brand. People, genuinely people trying to build their own brand. Not because they have anything to sell or give, but because by building their brand, they get free stuff. I don't really know how that works, but there's people doing that. Maybe you're trying to build, that's not for you, but you're trying to build the perfect family. Maybe you're trying to build the perfect career and trying to just putting everything, all your energy into having this great career. Maybe you're trying to build the perfect healthy body. And I'm not talking about people who kind of, big muscle, crazy, weird-looking people with muscles. I'm talking about just people. Maybe you go to the gym many, many, many times a week, and you go out for many runs, and you just it will all be okay if I can just have the perfect healthy body. Maybe you're trying to complete a bucket list of holidays. Maybe you're trying to build financial stability, and you're working really hard in how you save and how you do stuff with that. Maybe you're trying to create the perfect opportunities and build that for your kids. Maybe you're trying to build a business empire, I don't know. Or maybe you're just trying to build enough today that tomorrow isn't as much of a struggle as today was. We are all building. And we all build individually and we build corporately. The perfect society. where, everyone can have everything they dreamed, the American dream. You can be what you want to be. Maybe that's what we're trying to build. Maybe we're trying to build the perfect church. What are you building? What are we building? And I think for many of us, it's summed up in what King Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in my palace in comfort and prosperity. The Message says it like this, Message translation, Eugene Peterson says it like this: I was taking it easy without a care in the world. I feel like there's a song there. Taking it easy without a care in the world. The great utopia where everything I have ever wanted, I have. Everything I need, I have. And everything I want. And everything's just great and it's an easy life. Mate, that, I think, is what many people are trying to build. But the problem is that for 99.99999% of us, that is very rarely achievable. Firstly, I want to suggest this. It's very, very hard to be content with what you have. It's very hard to be content with what you have. Do you know there are more billionaires post-pandemic than there were pre-pandemic? People who have just want more. They just want more. They just get more. You get a taste for something, don't you? Like, I love chocolate. If you give me chocolate, I will eat it. If you give me a little bit of chocolate, I will eat the rest of the bar. I will eat it. If there is a chocolate box in our office, which occasionally there are, they don't last very long. Because we all go, oh, I'll just have one. And then another one. And you end up with this kind of thing in what we do in our office, where people realise they probably had too much chocolate, and they'll take it and put it on someone else's desk who'll do the same thing. When we have something, we want more of it, don't we? And it's really, really hard to satisfy. And it's not just about stuff, but sometimes it's about time and holidays. I remember a few years ago, we went away as a family, and I loved it, and I had a great time. And then I had to go to work, and I spent all of work going, I just wish I could be on holiday. I just wish I could do that again. It's really hard to be content with what you have. But secondly, this. Shaking always comes. There is always a shaking. And when the shaking comes, what you have built gets tested. King Nebuchadnezzar gets shaken. God shakes him, and everything gets taken away. Right down to his very humanity. Everything gets taken away. There's a lot of shaking going on in our world at the moment. I probably don't need to tell you that. But, from war, both in Ukraine and in many other parts of the world, to the cost of living crisis, to political movement, both here in the UK, but also beyond. There's big stuff, big shaking going on in the world. I'm not saying this to scare you, but we've got to be real sometimes. There's big shaking going on in the world, big stuff going on that barely makes the news. There's things going on in China and Brazil and other places. Just doesn't ever make the news. And then there's climate change. So much shaking going on, as well as the many different personal challenges that we all have ourselves on a day-to-day basis. There is always a shaking. COVID was kind of the ultimate shaking for many of us, wasn't it? A shaking of our health, what our finance looked like, and even what did tomorrow look like. Could we get back to what yesterday looked like? We just didn't know. In the Gospels, Jesus regularly talks to his disciples and those around him about what they are building. And in Luke 12, in what is named in my Bible as the parable of the rich fool, Jesus tells a story about a man who builds a barn for his stuff to put his crops in. And then he fills it. And so he builds a bigger barn, and he builds a bigger barn, and he builds a bigger barn, so he can have more and more and more crops in his barn. And then God says to him, you fool, You will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? And it says in verse 21, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. And so that's the second question I have for us this morning. Who are you building for? Who are we building for? Are we building for us, for our personal gain? Are we building for our family? Are we maybe building for some people around us in our little community? Or are we building for Jesus? Are we building for our own comfort and contentment? Or are we building to see the kingdom of God come? Are we building for today and tomorrow? Or are we building for eternity? Here's a question you can ask yourself when you're not sure. Who gets the credit? Do you get the credit? Or does Jesus get the credit? Are you building with humility or with pride? The next part of Luke is a very famous section on worry. Many of you will know it. It's that bit where Jesus says, look at the birds, look at the lilies. Aren't they all beautiful? God looks after them all. Won't he look after you more? And he says, do not worry. He instructs us, do not worry. And then it says, Luke 12, 29 to 31 says this. And don't be concerned about what to eat and what to drink. Don't worry about such things. These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers all over the world. But your Father already knows your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give you everything you need. See, building isn't wrong. I want to be clear. Those things I listed earlier, they're not wrong. It's not wrong to want to provide financial stability for your family. It's not wrong to want your kids to have the best opportunities. It's not wrong to want to look nice. And it's not wrong to do all those things we talked about. It's not wrong to want to have a great church. I love our church. I want us to thrive. None of those things are wrong. See, God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to build. The Bible actually says in the book of Jeremiah, Nebuchadnezzar is referred to as my servant Nebuchadnezzar. Because God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to be risen up into his place of authority and power so that he could take the Jews into exile. God allowed it. And he uses Nebuchadnezzar to punish the people of Israel. And so it's not wrong to build. And God places each of us in different situations and spaces and relationships. But we are in those places by the grace of God, not by our own doing. And many of us have testimonies of being God just telling us where to be and then things working. And I haven't got time to go into some of those today, but God places us where we are by the grace of God. And he places us for the purpose of building his kingdom. So when the shaking comes, one of two things happens. We either end up looking down to the ground and chewing the grass, or we look up to the King of Heaven. We look to a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and we declare he is Lord of all. See, if we're building for him, then it determines how we build. And this applies to everything, our whole lives. He can't be Lord of just part of it. If Jesus is Lord of your life, he is Lord of your life. You can't just say, you can have this bit, but I want to keep this bit. We, last summer, Ruth and I, we kind of had this time where we just felt like exhausted, like loads of stuff was going on, and some of it was good stuff and some of it was challenging stuff, but we were just completely worn out. And we got to the summer and we were on holiday and I was out walking the dog, and I just was having a conversation with God, and I said, God, I'm so tired and I just feel battered and I just feel worn out, and God, it can't always be like this. And God just said this to me. He said, I've given you everything you need to get through this, but you've not done it. And he reminded me that God had been speaking to me and Ruth about Sabbath, the importance of Sabbath, taking a day, taking time out to rest in his presence, to not work. And I think since about Easter through to about half term, we'd had quite a good rhythm. Like most Saturdays, we'd done a pretty good job of resting and that. And then it got to June, and suddenly I got offered some sound work, so I went and did that because that was fun. And we had the church weekend, and a load of other stuff happened, and suddenly we didn't stop, and we just kept going, all the way through to the summer. And the words that came out of my mouth were, I don't have time to Sabbath. But Sabbath is a gift from God. It's a gift that's designed for me to rest in him and be revitalized and rejuvenated. And there's so much more to say on Sabbath. I'm not going to do a preach on that this morning. But I was just challenged. I was like, he's given me everything I need. And I've said I don't have time for it. Is he Lord of our lives? All of it? Or are we too busy building what we think needs to be built? So here's some examples for you this morning that I just felt prompted. Finances. Are we too busy building our own finances, financial stability, planning for tomorrow, planning for that holiday, planning for all those things, that we're not giving God what's his? God calls us to give financially. That's part of our offering to him. When we worship, we come and we bring our finances as part of that. And sometimes it's tempting to say, well, God, I'll give you, I'll give in the offering when I've sorted out these bills, or I've sorted out these things, or I've sorted out this. But actually God's saying, I want you to make a decision to give to me what's mine. Maybe it's time. I'll spend time with God once I've sorted out everything else. Once my house is tidy and this and that. The thing is, the problem with that is that God ends up in this teeny tiny window over here at the end of the day when you're really tired and you think, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, I'll just read my Bible for a couple of minutes just so that I've spent time with God. Now I feel good. But it doesn't work like that, does it? It doesn't work like that. Give time to spending with God. Give time to the purposes of God, what he's calling you to. And energy, like our energy, does God just get the leftover bits? And relationships. God calls us to community, to relationship with both him and with his people. And sometimes it's tempting to say, I'll invest in that when I've sorted myself out. But actually, how many of you know that there's restoration when you put yourself in the middle of community? Whatever it is, let's put our trust in him. The one who gives and the one that takes away. God invites us to build with him. Build a kingdom that cannot be shaken, that cannot be moved. The guys are going to come up. We're going to sing again. I just want to invite us now, just as they start to play, in whatever key Marcus chooses.
Give the Holy Spirit.
I just want to invite us now, first of all, just to consider, is he Lord of our lives? And you might have been a Christian, or said you've been a Christian for 20, 30 years, and actually there might be a moment this morning where you say, do you know what, he's not Lord of everything. And I just want to invite you just to take a moment, just say, God, I give you it all. And maybe you've never met Jesus, maybe you've never been introduced to him, and he's not Lord of your life, but you're sat there thinking, oh, there's something in this, and I can't really explain it. Then I'd love to talk to you at the end, or in a moment. I'll come down over here, and if that's you and you want to talk to someone about what it means to have Jesus as Lord of your life, then I'd love to chat to you. But also, just maybe there's areas of our lives where we've been building our own things, our own agendas. And some of those things are really good. Like, some of those things are great. But actually, we've been building them on our own terms. And we've been sat there going, look what I did. And actually, God says, I want to build with you. I want you to build with me. There's a cost to building with him. Sometimes he'll tell you to give stuff away. For me, I had to lay down part of my career when he told me to do something different. And it hurts and it's challenging, but actually the blessing of God just comes when you live in his presence and you live for him. So whatever that is, and whether it's one of those areas I mentioned or not, but just spend some time just giving it to him. And I encourage you today, if there's something practically you can do to do it. You know, if it's that area of relationships, then maybe just go and speak to someone and say, can we have a meal? If it's that area of finance, then, and you feel God's calling you to give more or to reassess what you give, then, you know, there's the opportunity to give here. The stewards have got a bucket at the back. You can go on our website, you can give there. But let's just sing and just declare his lordship over us as individuals, over us corporately, and over our world. Amen.